I'm Christopher Crawford, and I'm going to show you how to load film onto the stainless steel film developing reels. To process film, the film's got to be loaded on these spiral reels, which, when the film is loaded onto them, it separates the layers of the film from each other so that the chemicals can touch every surface of the film to develop it. And it's important that you get the film on there precisely, because if you have any of the layers touching each other because you haven't loaded the reel correctly, you'll get blank spots on the film where the developing didn't occur. There's several different manufacturers of these reels, and the very best ones to work with are made by a company called Hughes in England. And what's great about them is in the center here, there is these little tines that stick up that you stick the end of the film into, and it holds it in place and gets you a perfectly centered, perfectly aligned film on it. And basically you take a little bit of the film and kind of give it a little bit of a bend like that, push it in here, and just kind of slide it on until the tines engage with the holes on the sprockets, the sprocket holes. And then you just start winding it on. You can let it fall like that, it won't hurt anything. Keeping that slight curl to it as you're winding it on so that it falls into place in between the metal spiral sides. And you just keep doing this until the entire roll of film is on there. Now, of course, the hard part is you've got to do this in the dark. You can't see what you're doing, as we're doing here with this film, because if the lights are turned on, it'll ruin the film. But this is so easy to do with these reels that you can basically, feel for those little tines, stick the sprocket holes over them, and just start winding it on, and it works perfectly. Now, you don't want to pull too hard as you're doing this, because if you do, you can kink the film, or even cause it to jump out of the tracks there, and cause those problems with the film touching the layers below or above it. But it really doesn't take hardly any pressure at all. You just kind of let it walk itself on there. Most of the time, a 36 exposure roll of film is just slightly longer than what the reel is designed to hold. And if that, well, that isn't with this film, but usually Kodak and Ilford films are a little bit longer. If that's the case, just let it hang over the end. It won't hurt anything. And there it's done. You just cut off the end that's stuck onto the film spool there, and you're ready to go. Stick it in the developing tank, and you're ready to get on with the processing. Now, most of you guys are not going to have these reels. The Hughes reels are expensive. They're about $30 a piece. Especially if you're in school, a lot of the schools just won't buy these expensive reels. If you're doing this at home and you have your own darkroom, I strongly advise buying them, because even though they're expensive, if you take good care of them, they will last your lifetime. I've got some reels that are over 40 years old that I'm still using. Now, I'm not old enough to have bought them new, but they're ones that I bought used that were well cared for, and they still work well. So as long as you're nice to these reels, you don't drop them and bang them around, because if you drop them or you hit something on them, you can knock them out of alignment. They literally last forever. Now, most of you are going to have, especially if you're working like in the schools, you're going to have these inexpensive ones like this that have a little clip in the center that you have to stick the film under. Now, there's two problems with these. One is that these inexpensive reels, most of them aren't well made, and so a lot of times the sides aren't perfectly aligned, which makes loading the film on them correctly a real pain. The other issue is that when you put the film on there, you have to manually center it so that it's perfectly centered between the two sides of the reel before you start winding it on, because if you don't have it perfectly centered, or if it's on there where it's not straight, the film will actually kink and bind up as you're getting more and more of it wound on. And of course you have to do this in the dark, all by feel, which is why I like the Hughes reels, because when you stick the sprocket holes over those two tines, it's perfectly aligned, perfectly centered. You can't mess up. But I'll go ahead and show you how to do these. Take the film off of this one. I'm being careful here to wind it back on its little spool so that it'll be like a new roll for the demonstration. Now, when you're handling the film, you want to make sure that you don't touch the bottom side, the inside part of the curl, because that's the actual emulsion. That's where your images are at. If you get a fingerprint on this, the fingerprints, basically the oils from your fingers, they repulse the developer and they keep the film from developing in that place where the fingerprint's at. When I was in high school and first learned how to do this stuff, a lot of us messed up films that way because we weren't careful. And when you develop the negative, you would actually see your fingerprint, or my fingerprint, all across the picture, and there's no way you can fix it. So now it's okay to touch the back part of the film, the base side. That's the outer part of the curled film. That's just plastic. The actual image isn't on there, and so it doesn't really matter if the fingerprints are on there and repulse the chemicals, because the chemicals do not have any. They don't do anything to the base side of the film. So always make sure that you handle the film either by touching the back part or just by the edges, because that keeps the images from getting messed up. Now we're going to take this reel here, and there's a little. See if I can get this centered in front of the camera. There's a little clip right there, and what you want to do is get the film underneath that clip. And you can see here the film, I've actually cut the leader off the film before I did this, and you have to do this no matter what kind of reels you're using, because the narrow leader won't engage with the clip or with the tines on the Hughes reels. Now we're going to kind of bend the film slightly like that to get it in there, and see how I'm getting it right up to the clip. And then you want to push it under the clip. You can kind of walk it on with your finger like that. And then you need to make sure that it's centered. And you can see here that it's not. It's actually pushed over a little bit too far on this side. And so we're going to, I don't know if this is easy to see on here, we're going to try to kind of push it over slightly. And you have to do this all by feel. You can kind of stick your fingers on the edges here and feel if it feels like the film is pushed over too far on one side or the other. And once you've got it centered, then you do the same procedure we did with the Hughes reels. You kind of give it a little bit of a curve and just start walking it on. And if you did it right, if you've got it centered and you're pulling it out straight, not crooked, the film will go onto the reel. And I can see here, since I'm doing this in light, that the film has actually kinked up right here, and it's jumped out of the track that's supposed to go into. And I think the reason is that this old reel is one that's been dropped a couple of times, and so I don't think that I'm going to be able to make this one work. I don't use this reel for anything anymore except for using as a filler in the developing tank. If I've got like a 2-roll tank and I'm only going to do 1 roll, I'll stick one of these empty ones in just to fill the space. And you can see well, I've got the kink worked out of it now. Yeah, you can see how it wanted to bind up there. You don't want that to happen. And a lot of times what people do when they're loading these is if you kind of walk your fingers over the base side of the film like this, you can actually feel a spot like right there where the film has jumped the tracks. And then you can wind it back off and try again. And I'm not going to bother trying to walk this the rest of the way on. I think this reel's messed up, but that gives you an idea of how you're supposed to load these kind of reels. And then once you've got the film on the reels, then you can drop the reels in the tank. If you've got a multi-reel tank and you're only going to do, like this tank here holds 2 rolls. If you're only going to do 1 roll, you still need to have a second reel in there to fill the space, because otherwise the reels are going to flop in back and forth when you agitate the film, and that's not good. So I keep messed up reels like this to serve as a filler reel. Put your 2 reels in. Pop the lid on. Now this is an ancient tank. This is an old Honeywell Nicor tank from the 1960s. This is over 50 years old and it still works beautifully. I use it all the time. I bought it when I was in college back in the late 90s. So as I said, if you've got good stuff, and the Nicor reels and tanks back in the 60s were the best. They were the very best you could buy at that time. And they've lasted, longer than I've been alive. I'm 38 years old. So I think that buying the best quality stuff for film developing is worth it, because if you take care of it like this, it'll last forever. And then once you've got that part done, then you can turn the lights on, because the tank itself is light proof now. And it's made so that you can take the little center cap off here, chemicals can go in and out without light getting in, so you can do the rest of the processing with the lights on. And the roll of film here that I've used for demonstration, of course, is ruined because we're doing this in the light. So one thing that's a good idea when you're trying to learn to do this, because it's something that has to be done totally by feel, is that get a couple rolls of outdated film that you can afford to throw away, and try this in the light. Practice it over and over and over until you get it right when you can see what you're doing, and then turn the lights out and practice it some more, just trying to do it by feel. And once you get to the point where you feel like that you're good enough at it to actually do it with real film you're going to process, then you can do it, and hopefully it won't mess up your film then. If you do screw up, if the film isn't loaded on there correctly and you get, where there's kinks in the film or whatever, don't let it discourage you. When I was a teenager, when I learned to do this, I messed up the first 2 rolls of film I did. Everybody does, so it's not anything to be ashamed of.